What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. I have often wondered why certain names carry weight, why they press upon the chest like stones, even when spoken in the gentlest whisper. Some names are prayers, others are curses, and a few hover between the two like birds uncertain where to land. Marisol is such a name. I did not know it once. I wish I had never come to know it at all. But the truth is that names, once heard, have a way of sinking into the marrow. They grow there, unseen, until the day you realize the voice inside you is not entirely your own. It began, for me, with a journey that had nothing to do with the supernatural. I had set out for Mexico in search of crafts and traditions, remnants of an older world that still beat beneath the skin of the modern. I wanted to see the hands that shaped clay the way their ancestors had, to hear the stories that lingered in the breath of artisans whose lineages stretched back to forgotten empires. It was not ghosts I sought, but memory etched in wood, in fabric, in stone. And yet, as I would learn, memory and haunting are not so easily divided. In Veracruz, beneath the sun that burned like copper on the tiles of the market, I walked among stalls filled with color, embroidered hoopah, glazed pottery, masks carved into grins, both joyful and sinister. The air smelled of roasted corn, candied fruit, incense, and something salt-heavy from the sea. It was there, as I admired a row of clay figurines, that an old woman shuffled close. Her back was bent like a question mark, her hair coiled in gray braids. She asked me, in Spanish roughened by age, if I had heard of La Muñeca Maldita. I smiled politely. A cursed doll. Mexico was full of such tales. Children grew up on stories of La Llorona, of witches riding on the wind, of shadows that slipped between walls. Surely this was just another to amuse tourists. But the woman leaned closer, her eyes clouded yet sharp, and whispered, "Marisol watches. Even now, she's watching someone." The words brushed my ear like cobweb. I felt my stomach tighten though. I laughed it off. I asked her who Marisol was, and she only shook her head, muttered something that might have been a prayer, and shuffled away. I thought I would forget her words, but that night, in my small room where the fan clicked endlessly, I dreamed of a face pale as porcelain, with dark eyes too alive to belong to a doll. I woke before dawn, sweat cooling on my neck, and the name Marisol on my lips. In the days that followed, the name began to follow me. I heard it in passing when I should not have. A vendor muttered it, as if to ward off bad luck. A drunk in a cantina whispered it, while tracing circles on the wood with his finger. I asked, once or twice, and always received the same uneasy glance, the same deflection. "Don't ask," they told me. Better to let her rest. But rest was the one thing I could not give her. Something about the old woman's voice, about the dream, about the strange insistence with which the name clung to the air, compelled me forward. Perhaps it was arrogance. Perhaps it was that curiosity which has undone so many before me. I began to ask more directly, piece by piece, like shards of a broken mirror. I gathered the legend. There had been, long ago, a craftsman. His daughter Marisol had died young of fever, her life snuffed before her 8th spring. The man, hollowed by grief, created a doll in her likeness. He gave it eyes as dark as hers, lips painted with the faintest smile, cheeks touched with blush. But it was not enough. He wanted more than likeness, he wanted presence. And so he cut strands of his dead child's hair, weaving them into the doll's head, whispering prayers through tears. Some say he begged God to give his child life again. Others say he prayed to older powers, the ones who listen in the dark, the ones who answer when saints remain silent. Whatever he did, something came. The doll, they whispered, began to move when no one touched her. She watched, she whispered, and misfortune followed the household until the day the craftsman himself was found lifeless, his face frozen in terror, the doll sitting calm in his lap. After that, she passed from hand to hand, each story darker than the last, children waking at night to her voice, fires sparking in rooms where she sat, owners vanishing without trace, and always the same description, the eyes, alive, watching, waiting. At first, I thought these stories, exaggerations, urban legends built on coincidence, but then I saw her photograph. It was in Puebla. Weeks later, when a man told me he had seen her with his own eyes in the Museo de las Sombras, the Museum of Shadows. He was thin, pale, with hands that trembled as he reached into his wallet and drew out a photograph. The image was grainy, taken through glass, but the moment my eyes fell upon it, I felt the breath leave my lungs. The doll sat upright, her dress lace white, though stained by time. Her hair fell in dark waves that shimmered with a human texture no synthetic fiber could mimic. But it was her eyes that trapped my large, dark, glinting with something I can only call awareness. They were not painted or fixed. They were alive in some terrible, subtle way. "She doesn't look at the camera," the man whispered. "She looks at you, always at you." I tried to laugh, but my throat was dry. When I looked again, I felt it too, the strange certainty that her gaze had crossed the years, crossed the photograph, and settled on me. That night, I dreamed again. I was standing in a room I did not know, walls peeling, the air cold. In the corner sat the doll, her head tilted, her eyes locked to mine. And though her lips did not move, I heard a child's voice inside my skull. "You heard my name, now I hear yours." I woke gasping, my chest heavy, the room impossibly still. The fan had stopped, though the electricity had not failed. I lay awake until dawn, convinced if I closed my eyes again, I would feel small porcelain hands on my throat. From then on, I could not stop. To speak of obsession would be too small. It was hunger, it was compulsion. I wrote notes feverishly, gathered scraps of rumor, searched libraries and archives. I found mentions of her in old newspapers, a house fire in 1934, an unexplained disappearance in 1951, a collector of curiosities found dead in 1957. Each report left her unnamed, referred to only as a doll. But I knew, and as I dug, I began to feel her in my life. Shadows lengthened strangely in my room. Mirrors reflected movement when I was still. I caught the scent of burning wax when no candle was lit. Once, while writing by candlelight, the flame bent sharply, as though pulled by an invisible breath. I told myself it was imagination. But then came the night of the knocking. It was near midnight when the sound woke me. 3 sharp taps against the wood of my door. I froze, heart hammering. I knew the landlord had gone home hours ago, that no visitor would come at such an hour. The air was thick, as though the room had been sealed tight. I forced myself to rise, to open the door. The hallway beyond was empty, only silence. But when I turned back, my blood ran cold. On my desk, where I had left only my notes, lay a single hair, long, dark, too coarse to be mine. I touched it with trembling fingers. It was real, it was human, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and dust. I slept little that night. I kept the lights burning until dawn, yet even then I felt eyes upon me, always watching. The following week, I decided to see her for myself. Words, photographs, rumors, they were not enough. Something in me, reckless or already cursed, demanded proof. I boarded a bus to Puebla, to the Museum of Shadows, carrying only a notebook, a camera, and the uneasy knowledge that by seeking her, I was also offering myself to her gaze. The museum was small, tucked between old buildings on a narrow street. Inside, the air smelled of age, of dust, of things long shut away. Displays lined the walls, masks used in rituals, rusted tools from haciendas, crucifixes said to ward off demons. But my eyes sought only one thing, and then, in the final room, I found her. She sat in a glass case, small, delicate, almost beautiful. Her dress was white, though yellowed by years, her hair dark and real, her face serene. But her eyes, God help me, her eyes were alive. They fixed on me the moment I entered, and though I moved slowly around the case, her gaze seemed to follow. I felt it then, like a pressure in my chest, like a weight pressing me down. My vision swam. The air grew thick. Somewhere, faintly, I thought I heard humming the tune of a child, slow and mournful, and in that moment, I understood. She was not a relic. She was not a story. She was presence. She was waiting. I pressed my hand against the glass. It was cold, far colder than the room around me, and from within, her lips curved the faintest fraction upward, into a smile that had not been there before. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The guard asked if I was ill. I muttered something, forced myself out into the light, but the image of that smile, of those eyes, followed me. Even now, as I write, I see them behind my lids when I blink. That was the day I understood the curse was not in owning her, not in touching her. It was in knowing her name, in seeing her face, in letting her story enter you. From that moment, you belong to her gaze, and once she watches you, she never looks away. The first night after I took Marisol home, I dreamt of water. It wasn't the calm, glittering surface of a lake, or the playful crashing of waves on a shore. It was black, thick, almost viscous, moving slowly like oil through the cracks of an underground tunnel. I could feel the cold of it on my skin, rising higher and higher, until I was drowning. And somewhere in that darkness, a child's laughter rang out sharp, cruel, echoing like a bell underwater. When I opened my eyes, I was in my bed, drenched in sweat, and the doll sat where I had left her, on the wooden chair near the window, her glass eyes fixed in my direction, gleaming with the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The feeling of being watched was immediate, suffocating. Her gaze seemed sharper now, more present, as though she had shifted slightly in her seat during the night. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was only the remnants of a nightmare, but deep down, something in me stirred, warning me that the boundaries of dream and waking life had begun to blur. By the second night, my apartment no longer felt like my own. The corners seemed darker, the air thicker, as though shadows had learned how to breathe. I began hearing faint noises at odd hours, scratching, tapping, almost like little fingernails brushing against the walls. At first, I blamed the old pipes, the wooden beams, even the rats that sometimes found their way into the building. Yet none of those explanations held when I realized the sounds were always loudest when I was near Marisol. I started placing her in different rooms, testing a theory I didn't dare to name aloud. One night, she sat in the living room. That night, I heard tiny knocks on the coffee table. Another night, I placed her on a shelf in the kitchen. By dawn, I awoke to the clinking of spoons, as if invisible hands were playing with my utensils. No matter where she rested, the sounds followed, and always, when I checked, she was sitting there perfectly still, her painted lips curled in that delicate, mocking smile. The air grew colder around her. I noticed it first while passing through the living room one evening. My skin prickled as though I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer, even though the heater hummed just a few feet away. I held my hand out near her porcelain cheek, and I swear I felt the faintest pulse of icy wind slip from her. That night, I moved her back into my bedroom, perhaps out of some perverse fascination, perhaps out of a need to face the source head-on. But with her presence beside me, sleep no longer offered peace. Dreams began to curdle into visions. I saw a little girl with long black hair, her face blurred as though the world refused to remember her features. She whispered words I could not understand, in a language older than my bones. Her hands reached out to me, pale and small, but whenever I tried to grasp them, they dissolved into ash. Sometimes I saw fire instead of waterhouses burning, voices screaming in the night. Sometimes I saw her cradling Marisol in her arms, rocking her gently as though the doll were alive, and then her eyes black, endless, swallowing all the light would snap open, and I would jolt awake. What disturbed me most was not the visions themselves, but the lingering presence they carried into waking hours. Once, while drinking coffee at the kitchen table, I glimpsed movement in the reflection of the microwave door. A small shape darted behind me, too quick for logic to explain. Another time, as I brushed my teeth, I felt a tug on the hem of my shirt as though a child had tried to get my attention. Each time I spun around, there was nothing but the steady, unblinking face of Marisol. And then came the voices. At first, faint murmurs at the edge of sleep, whispers curling round my ears, indistinguishable but insistent, as though 2 or 3 unseen figures were conspiring in the dark. I told myself it was the echo of traffic outside, neighbors talking through thin walls. But one night, as the hour pushed past 3, I heard a voice as clear as the tick of a clock, a child's voice, soft yet sharp, calling my name. Daniel. I froze, blood pounding in my veins, every hair on my body standing erect. The sound had come from the corner where Marisol sat. I dared not move, dared not breathe. And then, after a silence thick enough to suffocate, the voice came again. Daniel, play with me. I wish I could tell you. I leaped from my bed, hurled the doll from my window, and fled into the night. But fascination holds its own kind of chains. Instead, I lay paralyzed, staring into the dark outline of her body, until exhaustion dragged me back into uneasy sleep. From that moment on, my world began to erode. The apartment seemed alive with unseen currents. Doors creaked open though no wind blew. Light bulbs flickered until they popped, leaving me stranded in sudden darkness. The mirror in my hallway warped my reflection, stretching my mouth into a grin when I knew my lips were pressed tight with fear. And Marisol, she seemed to move, never while I watched, but always when I looked away. Her posture shifted slightly, her head tilted at a new angle. As if tracking my every movement, I began researching her history with an obsession that consumed me. Late nights were spent combing through old archives, internet forums, any scrap of folklore I could find about haunted dolls in Mexico. I learned that Marisol was not widely known. Unlike other infamous cursed objects, her name surfaced only in whispers, buried deep in obscure stories from rural villages. A tale about a girl who had died tragically burned in a house fire, drowned in a well, poisoned by her own kin. The accounts varied, but one thread remained constant. Her spirit had been bound to the doll she loved most, refusing to move on, refusing to let the living forget her grief. Some versions of the legend claimed Marisol's doll was used in a ritual by her mother, who dabbled in folk magic to preserve her daughter's essence. Others spoke of a curse cast by a jealous neighbor who bound the child's soul to the doll so she would never know peace. Whatever the truth, the result was the same: a spirit trapped in porcelain, yearning for company, for play, for acknowledgement in a world that had tried to erase her. As I read, the pieces clicked into place with dreadful clarity. The dreams, the voices, the movements, they weren't random hauntings. They were invitations. But invitations to what? One evening, I decided to test her. I sat across from Marisol, candlelight casting long shadows across the room. The air smelled of wax and smoke, heavy with tension. I spoke aloud, my voice trembling. "Marisol, if you're here, show me." For a long moment, silence stretched between us. I felt foolish, like a man begging the darkness to answer. But then the flame of the candle flickered violently, bending sideways as though pushed by an invisible breath. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to remain still. "Why me?" I asked. The candle sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that perfect silence, I heard the faint giggle of a little girl, hyped, playful, but drenched in malice. After that night, the haunting escalated. Objects began to move on their own. Books slid from shelves with loud crashes. Cups rolled across countertops, and my keys disappeared for hours, only to reappear neatly arranged at Marisol's feet. The scratching sounds grew louder, sharper, sometimes so violent that I feared the walls themselves would split open. And the voice, always the voice, calling me, pleading with me, sometimes screaming in tones that shook my bones. I stopped sleeping. Shadows grew beneath my eyes. My thoughts frayed at the edges. Friends called, but I ignored them. Work emails piled up unanswered. My world narrowed to the confines of the apartment and the presence of the doll, who had become the black sun around which my entire existence revolved. And yet, I could not let her go. It wasn't just fear, it was fascination. A pull so strong it felt like chains around my soul. She had chosen me, singled me out from the endless sea of faces. And though the choice was a curse, it carried a perverse sense of destiny. Each time her voice whispered, each time her presence brushed against my skin, I felt both terror and intimacy, as though I were no longer alone in the world, but tethered to something vast, ancient, and hungry. I realized then, the haunting was not building toward an end. It was building toward a beginning. I used to think hauntings reached their limit at broken sleep, disembodied voices, and the occasional shadow creeping where no shadow should exist. I was wrong. Those were only the whispers, the prelude. What came next was not haunting, it was invasion. By the time the third week passed, the apartment no longer belonged to me. I moved through the rooms like a guest, careful, hesitant, as though every surface might bite. Marisol sat in the same chair by the window, but she was no longer an object. She was the heartbeat of the place, the cold center from which everything else spiraled outward. I began waking with scratches down my arms, thin red trails that burned but never bled. Sometimes they formed shapes I could almost recognize, crude letters, broken circles. One morning I found a mark just above my chest, 3 lines intersecting in a pattern one later discovered was similar to a sigil used in pre-Columbian rituals of binding. That discovery chilled me more than the wound itself. Someone or something was writing on me. Sleep, when it came, was no longer mine. The visions grew sharper, more insistent. I saw the girl again, the blurred face, the hair cascading in wet strands. She no longer stood in the distance, she stood right in front of me. I could feel her breath, damp and cold, brushing against my cheek. "Play with me," she whispered again. I wanted to scream, to wake myself up, but I couldn't move. My limbs were lead, and then I felt the distinct weight of her small hand pressing into my chest, as if testing the strength of the barrier between flesh and spirit. When I finally ripped myself awake, gasping, Marisol was sitting on my chest. Her porcelain face hovered inches above mine, eyes gleaming like twin black mirrors. I shoved her across the room in panic, and she struck the wall with a crack. For a moment, silence reigned. Then came the sound I will never forget, the sharp, angry sob of a child. Not from the doll's mouth, but from the very walls of my home. I thought I had gone mad. Perhaps I had. That day I left the apartment for the first time in weeks. The city felt alien, the faces of strangers blurred like those in my dreams. I wandered into a church without meaning to, pulled by some instinct. The priest there was an old man with kind eyes and trembling hands. I confessed it to sins of flesh, but to sins of spirit. I told him of the doll, of the girl, of the laughter that followed me even in daylight. He listened without interruption, but his eyes grew heavy with recognition. When I finished, he whispered, "You must let her go." I wanted to believe it was that simple, but when I returned home, Marisol was waiting by the door, placed carefully on the floor, as though she had known I would try to leave her behind. Her cracked cheek caught the dim light, and her painted smile looked sharper, more predatory. That night, I decided to fight. I set candles in a circle, the air heavy with incense. My research had led me to folk prayers, half Catholic, half indigenous, prayers that spoke of binding and release. I spoke the words aloud, my voice breaking, my hands shaking as I clutched a rosary that had belonged to my grandmother. At first, nothing. Then the flames bent sideways again, one by one, until every candle guttered violently. A wind surged through the apartment, though no window was open. I felt a weight pressing against my chest, heavier and heavier, until I couldn't breathe. And then the voice rose, not the playful child's whisper, but a scream, raw and guttural, reverberating from floor to ceiling. "You are mine." The rosary snapped in my hands, beads scattered across the floor, clattering like bones. I don't remember collapsing, but when I awoke, the circle was broken. The candles lay in puddles of wax. Marisol sat in the center, upright, untouched, her dress unstained, though the air reeked of smoke. Her eyes gleamed, and for the first time, I saw them move. They followed me as I crawled backward on the floor. Too weak to stand. From that night on, she no longer waited passively. She pursued. I began seeing her in places I had not left her. In the bathroom, perched on the sink, staring as I washed my face. On the kitchen counter, surrounded by spilled salt I had not poured. Once, I found her in my bed, tucked neatly under the covers, her porcelain hands folded over her chest like a corpse in a coffin. The whispers no longer came only at night. They invaded daylight, curling into my ears while I ate, while I walked, while I sat in silence. Sometimes they were words, sometimes laughter, sometimes sobs so heartbreaking they made my chest ache, and sometimes they were my own thoughts, code back to me in a child's voice, mocking, twisting, erasing the line between my mind and hers. I stopped eating. I stopped leaving the apartment. My body thinned, but my obsession thickened. I began speaking to her, not just in ritual but in conversation. I asked her name, though I already knew it. I asked her what she wanted, though the answer was clear. I asked her why me, though the silence that followed was more damning than any response. And then came the night of the fire. I woke to the acrid scent of smoke. At first I thought it was another vision, another dream bleeding into reality. But the heat was real, the smoke thick enough to choke. Flames licked up the walls of my living room, spreading fast, unnatural, devouring wood and plaster as though guided by unseen hands. In the center of it all sat Marisol, untouched by the inferno, her porcelain face gleaming orange in the firelight. She was smiling wider than before, as though the paint itself had stretched into a new shape. I grabbed her, instinct overpowering reason. She was cold in my hands, impossibly cold, colder than ice. The moment I touched her, the flames faltered, shrinking back like waves retreating from the shore. The smoke cleared in an instant. The walls bore no scorch marks. My lungs, raw with coughing, filled again with air. It had not been a fire. It had been her, a vision, a test, a demonstration of power. And I had failed, because by taking her into my hands, I had given her what she wanted, consent. The dreams shifted after that. They were no longer visions of a blurred child in shadow. They were memories. I saw her life, Marisol, the girl, not just the doll. I saw her running through dusty streets, clutching the doll tight against her chest. I saw her mother, face lined with sorrow, whispering prayers over bowls of herbs and ash. I saw the night of the fire, the house collapsing, the girl screaming as smoke filled her lungs. And through it all, I felt her pain, her fear, her rage. She had not chosen to stay. She had been bound. And now, she had bound me. I awoke with her on my chest again, but this time I did not throw her. I cradled her instead, as though comforting a child, and she whispered into my ear not with malice, but with something worse. Affection. You'll never be alone again. From that moment, I was no longer haunted. I was possessed. I could feel her moving inside me, like a second heartbeat, like a shadow coiled around my soul. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the strain of holding her presence. My eyes ached, and sometimes, in the mirror, I saw them gleam like hers, black and endless. The climax was not an explosion of terror, it was emerging. The doll no longer needed to move, because I moved for her. The whispers no longer echoed in the room, because they lived in my skull. The scratches no longer appeared on my skin, because the wounds were deeper, carved into whatever remained of my spirit. I had become the doll's keeper, or perhaps she had become mine. I don't know what day it is anymore. Time inside this apartment has stretched like melted wax, dripping and reforming into shapes I don't recognize. I can no longer tell when I am awake and when I am dreaming. The two states have folded together, one indistinguishable from the other, and in both there is only her Marisol, the doll, the girl, the curse, the shadow sitting just at the edge of my vision. I still keep her on the chair by the window, but she isn't just sitting there anymore. She's everywhere, in the reflection of the window at night, in the shimmer of the kettle when I boil water, in the dark of my eyes when I lean close to the mirror. When I speak, sometimes my voice emerges higher, softer, like a child's. Sometimes it echoes back to me a half-second later in a different pitch, as if we're both speaking through the same mouth. When I step outside on the rare occasions I do, world tilts, the colors feel wrong, too bright or too pale. Children stare at me on the street, dogs bark without reason. A woman once crossed herself when she passed me. I think they can sense it. They can sense her inside me, wearing me like a coat. The nights are the worst. That's when the memories come. Not mine, but hers. I smell the smoke of burning wood and cloth. Hear the shrieks of the people outside. Feel the suffocating heat as the ceiling collapses. I feel the weight of the doll in my child-sized arms, porcelain cracking under my grip. I feel the terror of dying at 7 years old, trapped in a room of flames. And then the cold sudden, absolute as my soul was pulled from my body and sewn into the little painted figure I had loved so much. Each time I dream this, I wake with tears on my face, and each time the doll is closer, sometimes on my pillow, sometimes on my chest. Once, she was standing by the door, though she has no legs to stand on. I don't even flinch anymore. It's routine. It's our routine. I've started to hear her thoughts, or maybe she's hearing mine. It's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. When I pick up a glass of water, she's already thinking of it. When I open a book, she's already read the words. Sometimes my hands move before I've decided to move them, like a marionette tugged by an unseen string. Sometimes my voice speaks words I don't understand in a language that tastes like smoke and ash on my tongue. I tried to burn her. It was a desperate, secret act, one last flare of human will. I waited until night and carried her to the kitchen, set her on the stove, turned the gas up high. Her dress blackened, but she did not burn. She grew cold, so cold the metal hissed with frost. The flames themselves bent backward, shrinking from her. And then she looked at me, not with painted eyes, but with eyes that moved, pupils like bottomless pit sand whispered, "No." The gas clicked off by itself. The next morning, I woke with the burn marks on my own arms instead. I think the old priest was right. I should have let her go, but it's too late now. She doesn't just live in the doll. She lives in me. She lives in the walls, the floor, the space between breaths. She has become my shadow, and I hers. I am not sure where Daniel ends and Marisol begins. I've begun writing everything down, these words. These nights, in case someone finds this apartment after I'm gone. In case someone else feels the pull of the little doll with the painted lips and the hair like dark river water. Maybe they'll understand. Maybe they'll run before she notices them. Maybe they won't. Sometimes, I think I could leave. I imagine walking out, leaving the doll behind, crossing the city until her voice fades. But when I picture the door, my feet stop moving, my fingers tremble. The thought of leaving her fills me with a grief so sharp it's like knives in my chest. Not my grief, hers. Her fear of abandonment, her rage at being forgotten. It pours into me until my own will drowns. A few nights ago, I dreamed of the ocean again. Not black water this time, but silver, endless, shining under a pale moon. Marisol stood beside me, no longer a child but something taller, older, cloaked in shadows. She held my hand, and together we walked into the waves. The water rose over our heads, cold as ice, and when I opened my mouth to scream, the sea poured into my lungs like liquid glass. But I didn't drown, I dissolved. My skin, my bones, my thoughts all washed away until only the two of us remained, bound together like a single echo. When I woke, I found salt on my lips. The apartment is changing. Doors open into rooms that weren't there before. Hallways lined with children's drawings. A nursery with a crib that rocks itself. A staircase spiraling down into dark water. Sometimes I follow them, thinking they're just dreams. But my feet come back wet. My hands smeared with ash. I don't answer the phone anymore. I don't go to work. I don't see friends. The world outside is fading like an old photograph. All that's left is this place, this story, this girl, whose name I speak more often than my own, Marisol. Marisol, last night. She spoke through me fully for the first time. My lips moved, but the voice was hers, high and lilting, like the sound of a skipping rope on stone. She said, "We are not finished." I don't know what she means. Maybe this is the beginning. Maybe she has found a way to live again through me. Maybe she's looking for others now, reaching through my eyes, my hands, my words. If you're reading this, if these words reach you somehow, be careful. The doll is still here. She's always here. She wants to be known. She wants to be remembered. And if you've read this far, if her story has sunk into your head, then maybe she's already noticed you. Maybe you've already heard her laugh in the dark, felt a cold little hand brush your arm. Maybe she's standing behind you right now, just out of reach, waiting for you to turn. Because that's the thing about curses. They don't end, they spread, they wait. And Marisol has been waiting a very long time. Asterisk, the story does not end. It loops, like a nursery rhyme whispered in the dark, an open door at the bottom of a staircase. If you close your eyes, you might hear it, the soft scrape of porcelain on wood, the child's voice calling your name, the promise of never being alone again.